everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today for this important training session on the updated environmental justice policy. Before we dive in, just a few quick housekeeping notes. First, we are recording this session, and the link, along with all of the resources mentioned, will be shared with you shortly after the session concludes. Additionally, we encourage your questions, so please feel free to type them in the Q&A box throughout the presentation. We're reserving the final 10 minutes of today for a dedicated Q&A session. Now, the goal of today's meeting is to walk you through key changes in the updated environmental justice policy and PennEnviroScreen tool. These updates represent a significant step forward in addressing historical inequities and ensuring environmental protection for all communities. Now, we are joined by two excellent speakers from the DEP today. First, we have Emily Green, who will be providing us with the background on the policy updates and outlining what this means for environmental justice initiatives moving forward. Second, we have John Roper, who will be walking us through the functionality and utility of the updated PennEnviroScreen tool. Now, to kick things off, I would like to introduce Emily. Emily, thank you for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you for the warm welcome, and thank you for inviting us to speak today. It's good to see some familiar names on the registration list. So, as Andre said, I'm Emily Green, the Southwest Environmental Justice Coordinator. So I oversee the 8 Southwest counties in the Commonwealth. And within the Office of Environmental Justice, or OEJ, my work is primarily focused on engaging the public and permitting and planning different projects. So I am fairly informal, so with such a small group, please don't hold back any questions or comments, throw them in the chat, or feel free to interrupt if something isn't clear. I want this to be meaningful and engaging, and on a topic such as policy that can be a little dry, so feel free to stop me at any time. First, we'll just start with our vision. So DEP's vision, I just want to highlight moving at the speed of business and innovation, and using best practices for the safety of present and future generations. That's where the Office of Environmental Justice really comes in, is seeing, kind of guessing where the future is going and how we can best meet those needs. Hello, Jordy. There are many definitions for environmental justice that are around, and so I just wanted to highlight what we use here in the office. So it is a long definition, but meaning the just treatment, meaningful involvement of all people, focusing on protecting from disproportionate and adverse environmental effects, including risks and hazards, and then working towards addressing structural and systemic barriers while understanding how those continue to unfold both historically and in the future. So we want to work on involving the prevention of future environmental injustices and the redress of those historic environmental injustices at the same time. I wanted to throw in this little graphic for equality, equity, and justice. We hear those terms used interchangeably in our line of work, but there are significant differences. So just a little graphic that shows the difference between them and maybe what that would mean for in terms of the environment, right? Historic inequities shown through the sloping fence there, and imagine this could also be because of unequal barriers in our environment shown through that. So how does this really relate to environmental justice specifically? We see low income and minority populations could be disproportionately exposed to adverse environmental impacts. And when we talk about that, we focus on disproportionate environmental impacts, how different environments, our built environment, our social environment, our natural environment, all combine to create those unequal outcomes. So together, those factors explain why some communities bear a heavier environmental and health burden than others, which in a nutshell is environmental injustice. So why does DEP even focus on this? The Pennsylvania Constitution, Article 1, Section 27, is the Environmental Rights Amendment. And this notes that people have the right to clean air, pure water, and preservation of our natural resources. And it's noted that this is our common property. So we have to take care of it, and we also have to make sure that our service agencies are taking care of that for us as well. A little bit of a background on the Office of Environmental Justice. DEP had an Office of Environmental Advocate for about 20 years. And in 2021, under the Wolf administration, there was an executive order signed for the Office of Environmental Justice. This marked a major step forward in advancing equity across the entire Commonwealth. formally established the Office of Environmental Justice, and formally established the Environmental Justice Advisory Board, which provides guidance and recommendations on environmental justice matters across the Commonwealth, and also created the Environmental Justice Interagency Council to ensure collaboration and coordination across executive branch agencies. Both of these board and council meet pretty regularly. So the Environmental Justice Interagency Council, I think, is 14 agencies right now across the Commonwealth that meet regularly to discuss things happening and also on furthering education. This executive order also reinforces the Commonwealth's commitment to protecting the health and well-being of all residents and tourists, especially those impacted by environmental burdens. So we'll get into the policy. Like I said, there was the Office of Environmental Advocate, but a formal EJ policy started initially forming in 2018. So those revisions were drafted. They were ultimately withdrawn. They were really similar to the public participation policy already that DEP had. So they spent the next 4 years talking internally and hosting public engagement sessions to determine what we needed here in the office, what we needed across the Commonwealth, and what the community wanted to see from that. How can we best make a policy that really hits home what environmental justice is? So in September of 2023, we published the interim final EJ policy. That's what we've been acting under for the last 2 years. So I consider that sort of our shakedown period, right? What did that look like when we were actually in action off of black and white paper? And so we received many comments from that policy. And then also internally, we found some things that we needed more clarification on, we needed better management over. And that led to our final EJ policy. So that was just implemented a couple weeks ago in January. And now we're on the external outreach, internal trainings, and formal implementation of that policy. Like I said, we received a lot of individual comments on the interim final policy. So this comment response document, I know some of you on this call submitted comments, so I just wanted to make sure that you knew the comment response document is published. It is on our website. You can find that on there. You can find every individual comment and our response to it. If you cannot find that, please let me know. We can schedule a call and go through it together. I'm happy to do that. They are grouped based on themes with similar comments. We received many comments that were the same or similar or had similar criticisms, and that was really helpful for us. We could see where there was a gap, where we could see there was a lag that we needed to fill and clarify in our policy. So what did we clarify? Section 1 and 2 of our policy, which we'll send a link out later if you want to look at that formally, but is the introduction and definitions of our policy. This is really the foundation of what our policy is. So commenters suggested the change to the environmental justice definition. So that is reflected in the new policy. And that really focuses on community voices, not just our voice, what is the community voice in each community, which led to some changes in what a community is, that definition of community and community-based organization. We wanted to make sure that they don't need to be formally organized. You don't need to be a formal community with outlines. We will recognize that you can be an organization or a community very informally. You don't need to be appointed by DEP. Section 3 is our environmental justice areas. So there's quite a few updates to this section. This is where John will come into talking about the PennEnviroScreen Mapping Tool. But I really wanted to highlight that commenters asked for expanded environmental justice area designations. So we wanted to capture that lived reality or the experience outside of numbers, right? We take a methodology, we take some numbers and data, and we make an EJ score, but that doesn't always exactly reflect what is happening in the community. So we wanted to make sure that there was language in there that also adapted to that as well. And there's additional language and updates to ensure the agency is following the latest available methodology, the data, and science when implementing our entire policy. So there's some more definitions on there and some more changes, but it is kind of nitty gritty, but most of it does come through the environmental justice areas on the mapping screen. Section 4 is our proactive community engagement. This is a majority of what our job is. So there's a common theme of that engagement, making sure we are proactively in the community. I don't want to only reach out to your community when there's a big project happening or when things are moving or when there's an emergency. I want to make sure that my door is open all the time anyways. Building those long-lasting organic relationships is what's really important to our office. I tell all of Southwest, my inbox is open, my door is open. Anything from something small as, hey, what's the office number so I can call, all the way up to, can you set out some time to explain what this permit means, what it means for our community, or I don't know if this is a DEP issue or not. Would you be able to help me even if it isn't? And so I want to make sure that, or our office wants to make sure that that proactive community engagement is happening tangibly, right? It's not based on favors or who owes what, but just that our door is open. We want to build that trust that historically hasn't been there with state government. So the language reflects that, right? Reaching communities and centering on community voices. Which leads us to, who do we even engage? And the short answer is everybody. I often meet with residents just grabbing a coffee if they have questions, interest groups. I meet with some high school clubs. They're just interested in sustainability and environmental justice. So I meet with them as a DEP representative, all the way through religious groups, industry themselves, up to the federal government and elected officials. We do have some questions about, right, what are we doing every day? And so in 2025, still under the interim final, we met with 500 community organizations and leaders throughout the Commonwealth. I think these are some pretty, I would say, modest numbers. I feel like we were hosting presentations and events every day, and that's great because that's exactly what we love to do. We just want to talk to people and educate them on what DEP does, what we can do, what we can't do, and what our policy means for these communities. So again, not only are we worried about the quantity of these numbers, but the quality of those relationships. Section 5 was the enhanced public participation update. So what happens when there actually is a permit? What happens when it comes to the office? So we did have some clarification on what a trigger permit is and those types of trigger permits. A trigger permit, for those who aren't aware, is a designated permit list of authorizations that are applications that we could receive here in the office. And if they are in an environmental justice area, they are automatically called a trigger permit, and it's required to do enhanced public participation. That could look various different ways. We often see that as general outreach, fact sheets, all the way up to public meetings and hearings of that sort. So commenters suggested we reference that this policy work in conjunction with the public participation policy already in DEP's work. So we wanted to make sure that we weren't superseding or underseeding anything. We wanted to work in conjunction with public participation already happening throughout the office. Some permits do require a public participation. We just make sure it's enhanced. There are additional language clarifications. I'll get into that when we talk about trigger permits here in a minute. Section 6, the inspections, compliance, and enforcement. What happens after a permit is issued, right? We don't just say goodbye. We don't do all this public engagement and then leave communities. We want to make sure that we're going beyond that public participation and moving into that regulatory authority method. DEP's goal is for facilities and sites to be in compliance. So sometimes that our enforcement measures look like civil penalties, and we want to make sure that environmental justice areas are given additional consideration when using a civil penalty matrix to determine enforcement areas. So again, that's case by case basis, but that is something that we are working with those officers within the environmental justice and DEP. Community environmental projects are another highlight for us. We want to make sure that if there is a community fund that comes from enforcement actions, those are community-driven projects. We also want to make sure that we are targeting communities if we see moments or grants or anything like that to enhance development. And filing complaints. There's complaints and emergencies, general outreach, We want to know when things are happening. We are boots on the ground, but we don't live in every community that we serve, so we want to make sure we know what's going on. Just throwing this up there, you can report an environmental complaint to DEP on our toll-free number. You can do it online, and I threw in the Southwest Regional number there on the left-hand side too. So all reports are confidential. There are ways to be fully anonymous, but sometimes we do follow up with you. We want to give you an answer to your questions also. Community development and investments. We kind of talked about this in the last section, but we want to target grants and promoting redevelopment opportunities. So the DEP grants management policy prioritizes EJ in grant making and also offers that additional consideration for applications that support the community-driven projects that emphasize environmental justice and that are in environmental justice areas. There are also grants for technical support in the EJ area trigger or designated opt-in projects. So when DEP is aware of any technical support opportunities, we try to share that out. And again, that leads back to our proactive community engagement. We'll see grants come in and we think, oh, this organization sort of aligns with that. I'm going to send them some extra info so they're aware of it. DEP explores those opportunities to provide support for community projects, brownfield redevelopments, and other things. We cannot talk about environmental justice without talking about climate initiatives. So this section of our policy is updated to reflect the climate action plan involvement that environmental justice does. So we ensure climate-related initiatives and consider and prioritize the communities that are disproportionately impacted by climate change, right? In Pennsylvania, we see flooding, heat waves, storm surges. Those are already here in our backyard. So we work towards that. We ensure the climate action plan developed under the Pennsylvania Climate Change Act addresses those climate adaptation plannings for environmental justice areas. So adaptation and mitigation from the start is a priority for us. We want just, again, making sure that we're engaging communities in disaster planning, critical investment, and policy initiatives. So what about the policy updates? The environmental justice final policy will require review every 5 years, and then the EJ area identification mapping every 2 years based on the latest data. So that might change, right, as years go on. We've seen that in the last couple of years. So, but we just want to make sure that we, again, are moving at the speed of business and using the latest available technology.
Emily, sorry, it's not every 2 years. It's like when we get to it, because we don't know exactly how often we need to do it. It's like regular, but not on a concrete time frame.
Okay. Every 2 years, that was the minimum that we actually have to consider whether there's a forceful update to the map, I think. Thank you, Jordy.
Sure.
So
I just didn't want people like waiting in 2028. Where is it? There's no promise about it coming every 2 years.
Right, and updates can be made intermittently as needed also.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked about trigger permits. This is Appendix C of our policy. This is exactly what it looks like if you would look that up. And this is just those lists of permit authorizations where if they are in an environmental justice area, they will automatically be looped into the EJ policy and will have enhanced public participation. So you'll see there's a lot of air, waste, and mining permits on here. They are pretty technical. So if anyone had any questions about those, I'm happy to dive deeper offline. But what happens if there is a project where we want EJ involvement, but it's not a trigger permit? You can fill in an opt-in request form. So that is online. You can get that right on our EJ page. And you can also, I will send the link out after this as well. But this will just lets us know that the community wants some more involvement, some enhanced public participation. The regional offices may also preemptively designate projects under the environmental justice policy. So there are times where we get some big projects in, they say, hey, we want EJ involvement in this. And then that level of involvement is at the regional discretion also. So why do we even care about public participation? We hear often, oh, I submitted a comment, but nothing came from it. Or, you know, we didn't like this project, but it still happened. Like, what is the point? So we just want the public to know that we take your comments very seriously. We read every single one. Every single one passes by my desk, our engineers' desks, our technical reviewers, and it does improve the quality of agency decisions and improves those applications. We want to build a better permit. Again, the idea is that we are moving towards compliance always. And so I have seen here in the Southwest over the last 2 years a number of projects that we have received comments from the public where we say, yeah, we need to take that into consideration. Let's rework this. And so we do take that. We can, there's a lot of value in hearing what the community is. It's easy for us to look at it internally and not consider what's happening outside. Also building those relationships, addressing concerns from the start. There are sometimes we hear comments where we're like, well, this isn't really related to the permit, but that is something that we need to discuss further because that is a DEP avenue. So we just wanted to reiterate that we really do value enhanced public participation. DEP has a project portal. So through our environmental justice webpage, you can find that. So all of our current trigger projects or opt-ins, you can see them on there and you can see any updates that we have and you can ask our regional staff as well. I just wanted to throw up there that eFax, eNotice, and the PA Bulletin are primarily where you can find updates on projects and permits actions. You can also on eFax find compliance actions on there as well, including inspections, compliance, and enforcement. I know I'm cutting into John's time here, but we also have our environmental justice self-enroll form. And you can also sign up for our newsletter, or you can reach out to regional staff and we'd be happy to send you updates on general projects, things going on, grant work, anything like that. So I just wanted to throw, my name is highlighted on there for Southwest, but again, you can contact any one of us and we'd be happy to help. And I don't know if there's any questions. I saw something in the chat, but I think it was Jordy.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that was kind of a whirlwind of our final policy, but if anyone has any questions, I would gladly take them now before I turn it over to John and he can do all the fun stuff. Okay, I am going to pass it over to John. I will stop sharing my screen.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and get set up real quick. Here we go. All right, can everybody see this okay? Awesome, perfect. I'm going to go ahead and hit share then. Oops, I'm going to have to go through real quick. Well, hey, while I'm getting to the slide, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is John Roper. I am the current Governor's Science and Technology Fellow. My background is in sustainability science. And for the first couple of months here in the Office of Environmental Justice, I worked on updating the PennEnviroScreen Environmental Justice Mapping Tool. If the slides don't cooperate, then I'll skip over them and go ahead and hop into covering the actual PennEnviroScreen tool. Let's see if I can get this to present. All right. You know what? I think I'm going to go ahead and just present from here because it looks like the slides are having some trouble cooperating with the network. So the PennEnviroScreen tool is DEP's environmental justice mapping tool. It's intended to provide a snapshot of undue environmental burdens on vulnerable communities, and it helps do so by combining pollution burden and population characteristics to identify environmental justice areas. This helps to show us where the environmental justice policy applies and where communities that are in need of enhanced public participation are located. So the PennEnviroScreen, it's kind of a Swiss Army knife as a tool. It has a lot of different purposes, and it can be used for, while it was created primarily for permitting and enhanced public participation, it can also be used for research as well as identifying grants and looking at grant application criteria and mapping that out to the state of Pennsylvania. I'm going to go ahead and drop a link in the chat real quick, or actually I'll ask one of my colleagues to drop a link in the chat to the PennEnviroScreen tool. But The PennEnviroScreen tool itself, as we mentioned, is made up of pollution burden and population characteristic indicators. Now, there's actually 32 indicators, and they combine in this way. The pollution burden is comprised of the environmental exposures category as well as the environmental effects, and the population characteristics um, category is combined with, or it is comprised of sensitive populations data and socioeconomic populations data. We take those and we multiply the larger categories together to get our final score, which determines whether or not an area is in an EJ area or not. Now, the actual criteria that we use is a combination of, or the score that we calculate is a combination of these 32 indicators. I'm going to leave this up there for a second while I talk a little bit about the PennEnviroScreen update. So in the previous PennEnviroScreen version, which we refer to as 1.0, we had the 32 indicators. In PennEnviroScreen 1.1, we didn't update any of the indicators themselves, but we did update the data sources. So we're using data from about 2023 for the current model. Um, this is pretty cool though, because part of what we saw in the previous version was that our methodology was missing out on areas that were really pollution burdened or burdened by pollution, but didn't necessarily have the population data necessary to calculate a final score. We address that in the updated version of PennEnviroScreen by having any area that's in the 80th percentile for the overall score be an EJ area, in addition to any area that falls in the 95th percentile of pollution burden census block groups. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up the actual PennEnviroScreen and walk you through some of the features and how to navigate it. Before we get started, could I have somebody suggest an address to take a look at for this demonstration? You can shout it out or drop it in the chat. Either one works. All right. You know what? Yeah, let's go check out the DEP office in Pittsburgh. So I'm going to go ahead and put in 400 Waterfront Drive. It'll go ahead and auto suggest it'll auto suggest the address. We're going to go right into Pittsburgh. So you can enter an actual address or you can click on a census block group itself. In order for the results for the census block group that you've searched to actually come up, you have to go ahead and click on the map after it zooms in. The results will pop up in the Identify Results pane on the left, and it'll show that this is an environmental justice area because the final score is in the 84.1 percentile. And it's also an EJ area because of the pollution burden, falling in the 99th percentile for that. I'm going to go ahead and show you how we can look at some of the other layers. When you get into the PennEnviroScreen, which first I'm going to show you guys this real quick. If you want to see the census block group that you're clicked on, you can hit this highlight and zoom feature, and it'll show you the extent of the census block group that you're in. But you can see this one's kind of wonky. It's almost like a weird steak or a tomahawk or something. If you want to click on other layers in the PennEnviroScreen, you have to click on the Layers tab. It'll drop down and show you the available layers to display within PennEnviroScreen. When you immediately get into the PennEnviroScreen tool, what shows up is the current PennEnviroScreen score for 1.1, which is showing the updated data, but you can also take a look at the PennEnviroScreen score for 1.0. If you want to see the updated information after clicking a layer on or off, you have to click again on the census block group for that updated data to show up here. And you can see that in PennEnviroScreen 1.0, this actually wasn't an EJ area, but it's one of the ones that we would have missed in the last version because this was in the 98th percentile for pollution burden. So very pollution burdened. It is now in the updated version in environmental justice area for both socioeconomic and population characteristics, as well as the pollution burden and exposure factors. So because this group deals a lot with cancer, I'm going to show you some of the actual environmental justice indicators that make up the PennEnviroScreen score. Also, before I dive into that, I wanted to show you that in the PennEnviroScreen, there's kind of a hierarchy with the layers. And in order for a layer to actually show up on the map, it has to be the one, you have to have anything above it clicked off. So like here, we can go ahead and show the PennEnviroScreen score. And the only thing that we can display on top of that is the environmental justice areas, which shows up as a hash mark on the map. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off real quick and turn off the PennEnviroScreen score and show you that if you come in here, we actually have all of the environmental justice indicators and they're broken down by subcategories. I think to take a look at cancer risk, we can go ahead and take a look at, I think it's in sensitive populations. Yes. So we can go ahead and click on the layer for cancer, and this comes from the CDC Places data. So you can see that for this census block group, we can go ahead and click again to see the actual results and the score for the cancer data. We can see that it's a really low ranking for cancer. It's in the 21st percentile for the total state. So while this is a low cancer area, we can go take a look at somewhere that has more concentrated cancer risk, such as this area or this census block group around Williams Road in Pittsburgh. So go ahead and click on that. You can see that that's in the 72nd percentile for cancer risk. Now, if we want to take a look at why that is, we can go and look at the environmental exposures and some of the environmental effects. Let's say we want to take a look at diesel particulate matter. So now this layer is overlaying on top of what we were just looking at with the cancer risk. Some of the data in the PennEnviroScreen is collected at different layer or at different levels. Like sometimes you'll have a census tract or a county level polygon that's going down to a census block group. I don't think that that was necessarily the case for this layer, but it is interesting to see how much is kind of blued out and showing that there's high risk for diesel particulate matter. But it's a really useful tool for being able to see what environmental exposures you have within your community, and then also seeing the health impacts of those and how those impacts are distributed. It truly does show you a snapshot of, what is my community dealing with and what are the impacts of those burdens. So if you want more information on the actual indicators that are in the PennEnviroScreen, you can hit the three ellipses towards the right, and you can see the information related to how it's actually collected or how this layer is calculated. We also have a ton of different reference layers. So you can see this information within the context of a county, the state. We have municipal boundaries as well. And if you ever want to look at and see the scores within that extent, you can use the highlight and zoom tool to at least see what kind of scores are in that statistical area. We also, just going over some of the other general features, we have a legend, which will show you all the information for the activated layers that you have clicked on. We have a print function for doing basic reporting, which will print out your current view as well as information from the layer or information from the legend and the activated layers that you have on. But it's also pretty cool because you can bookmark an area and you can load it in at a later date if you have an area that you're looking at for grant applications or something like that. You can also download the data at the DEP Open Data Portal, and there are other links involved, or there are other links that are helpful up at the links section as well as the about section. I think the only other thing that I'd like to show y'all before we open it up for some questions is something called the swipe tool. This is particularly helpful for comparing how things have changed across PennEnviroScreen versions. I'm going to go ahead and clear the map real quick. I'm going to click back in, let's say, central Pittsburgh, and I'm going to go ahead and activate the swipe tool. So I'm going to hit enable swipe, and then you can change the base map and the underlying imagery that you're looking at. I'm going to keep this as images because it's pretty easy to see and tell what's going on in this area. You can come in here and select different layers for the actual swipe tool. We're going to go ahead and put PennEnviroScreen 1.0 on the left and 1.1 on the right. Go ahead and do that. So now you can see how things changed in between PennEnviroScreen versions. I believe this is showing us the areas that were environmental justice areas during PennEnviroScreen 1.0. And if I go ahead and swipe all the way over, you can see how that has changed since 2020, or I guess since 2019. But it's really useful for seeing how EJ areas have changed. And if you want to take a look at what actually changed, you can go back and forward in the indicators under the identify results section, and you can click on as many as you'd like. They might not show up exactly how you'd like to see it on the map, but you can at least see the data. And if any of y'all are savvy with ArcGIS, you can download this data and play around with it and get really crazy with layering things. But I think that's everything I had. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. Um, we're now going to move into our Q&A. So a lot of this information was really in-depth and dense. So if you have any questions, we're a small enough group where you can just unmute and ask away. Maybe just to get us started here, I have a lot of questions, but first a quick comment. John, during your presentation, I was also working in the PennEnviroScreen tool just to see if I can like follow you, see what I can do. And I was using my old email in Scroll Hill in Pittsburgh, and it's just a lot of critical information. I just had no idea about where I lived for years and about the exposure, specifically toxic air emissions and hazardous waste and storage sites. I had no idea when I lived there that that particular neighborhood was in the 85th percentile. So just after using it for literally 3 minutes, the updated version, just astounding. So thank you so much for walking us through. It's really, really enlightening information.
Andre,
But
can I
uh,
say one thing?
please,
Yeah. So I'm the unofficial, meaning I don't have it in my title, but I work as the project manager for the tool, in addition to being a regional coordinator like Emily. But I have the North Central region, which is like incredibly rural. But one of the things is like the tool has been updated, but there's about we call it sort of half jokingly the PennEnviroScreen experience, like how people interact with it, and like how we can enhance that so they can better understand what's there. We're still building that out. Like we were pushed to do the update as soon as it was out, ready January 3rd. So a little bit like a video game or software. Like this is like it's not beta in the sense that we're going to change it, but like we had to put it out there knowing that we're going to build out all of that. So like one thing is, that we're aiming to do, in the matter of months is like have on the website a better explanation of like what hazardous waste sites is, right? Because just there, it doesn't really necessarily tell you a lot. And one of the things is that measure includes the kinds of sites that are in that census block group, but then it has ones that are nearby, decaying by linear distance, right? So sometimes what you're seeing, which is useful about the tool, but it also means, you know, I've had people be like, well, how can that be? There's nothing there. And I'm like, well, there may not be that many landfills, hazardous waste sites there, but it's near others.
yeah, thank you. That's helpful. Especially, I appreciate what you said about the tool or the experience, as you say. Uh, growing and becoming more innovative to even have descriptors for what these exposures mean and what they are. I think that's going to make it that much more accessible to community. So I really appreciate that. Um, with that accessibility in mind, John, I do have a question. I know you mentioned that the data is currently from 2023, I believe is what you said. So with that in mind, how frequently is the underlying data for the tool updated? And when it is updated, is there like a notification system for users, or like what is that process like for informing the community that these updates have occurred?
Yeah, so I believe with the last round, so the update that went live on January 3rd marked our first update. Um, I think, Jordy, correct me if I'm wrong, but the intent was originally to like do it in about 6 months or so, and it took about 14 months to update the underlying data, and it was done with I believe that there was a press release about the new version rolling out. It was also coupled with the policy, which definitely helps. Um, but I know that updates to the actual pen and buyer screen, I believe that if there are any official updates, it'll go through the Pennsylvania Bulletin. And you can find that information there. I don't know if it's necessarily like the most helpful amount of information that gets put out on there, but it is at least a notification. Yeah.
I mean, Andre, we're not like it's not. So there's a couple of things. One, each indicator, like cancer, for example, is a rolling 5 year average. So
Yes.
sometimes when we say the years, we might say something that sounds a little weird, but like PennEnviroScreen 2023 1.0 that Don was talking about was had if it had 5 year data, it was because we're not collecting the data, we're just going out and finding data that's been published by somebody else,
Yeah.
and some of it's federal sources and some of it's state sources. But anyway, some things are on that rolling 5 year average, others aren't. In general, so the PennEnviroScreen 1.1 that we just released, the data in there captures anything between roughly 2019 and I'm sorry, 2020 and 2024, something like that. In terms of notification, we should be better at that. I mean, we do have this, which we have this form where people can like opt in, and so we do have like a newsletter and other things where if you're on that list, we'll include that because John's right. I mean, yeah, sure, you can put a notification for the PA bulletin, but that is like almost it's very comprehensive. So by definition, it's the least useful for most people because it's really hard to wade through.
Yeah. Appreciate that. I do want to maybe pivot over to Emily quickly. I saw that you added something in the chat if you want to speak more to that.
Yeah, we're really interested in how you and your organizations and your jobs or your universities are using environmental justice policies, not even ours, but just in general, what that conversation is looking like. It's really important for us that we're staying on top of topics too, and that doesn't just mean going to webinars, that means what's happening in our backyard. But also we want to know how to better collaborate. So is the mapping tool working for you? Is it not working for you? Is there a different mapping tool that you prefer over this one for some reason? How are we explaining this, or how are we explaining what environmental justice is and what that looks like tangibly, what that looks like maybe in the future? So yeah, I'm happy to have those conversations with anyone too, and just how you're using that.
I really appreciate that you speak to and emphasize the importance of collaboration. And so reflecting on that collaboration, I have a question. What are the primary ways the community can continue to engage with the DEP regarding the implementation of the new EJ policy?
Sure, I would say signing up for the self-enroll form in our newsletter, being aware of just what's going on statewide. We can also narrow it down if you just wanted updates from me. I do send some updates just countywide also to some people, or if there's a specific project you're looking at, I'm happy to send those to as DEP is made aware of changes. We can send those out publicly also. That way you're not waiting for the Pennsylvania Bulletin or trying to figure out how to use it. But also just if you ever had questions, like feel free to reach out to me directly. I can act as a liaison for DEP and get you to the right contact if needed.
Like, do you all know that I was thinking about the other question that Emily had about or suggestion, like if there are other maps, like I'm dropping a link, but Allegheny County has its own climate resilience story map. Is that something, are most of the folks here Allegheny County or nearby? Okay. So that's an example of like, I mean, honestly, like, sometimes there may be like we know about that because they reached out to us, but if somebody told Emily, hey, there's this tool that we like, and it may have some very specific, it may meet some needs that are, for Allegheny County, like urban heat islands or urban canopy coverage or things that are very specific that have a legitimate role in that conversation. It's just not that's not data we can necessarily fit into PennEnviroScreen because it's specific to that area. But knowing that it exists is useful. And there's the other side, which is like, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating what you said, Emily, but like if you are interested in like questions you could ask about cancer or health impacts, we can't necessarily make a statewide tool, but we can have conversations with you about what you're trying to do. And we're not necessarily, in fact, we're not like experts on all of this, like neither John nor I, but we are good at collaborating with people about, so there may be other researchers or groups who are doing research, and we can't necessarily promise a strategic partnership like the one that did all the research about non-conventional gas a couple of years ago that Pitt did, but we can at least start to talk about what would go into things like that.
Yeah, it seems like from what I've been hearing from all three of you, the DEP, there's a very um, consistent strategy to stay open and flexible to communities and always responsive to communities. And I think that's something, particularly with the rollout of the new EJ policy and updated PennEnviroScreen Mapping Tool, really, really impactful and important. So I just wanted to give you kudos and say thank you. I have another question, surprisingly. If anyone has any other questions, I don't want to go up the entire Q&A section. But something I'm really curious about um, is, I guess this is for Emily. How would the DEP measure the effectiveness of the updated policy in the coming years?
Wow.
That's a conversation we have,
That's
I think,
PhD
daily
level.
in our office. Again, it goes back to that quantity and quality. We want to make sure that, yeah, we're hitting our communities and we are being effective, but what effective means for Pittsburgh Central might be different than rural Fayette County. And sometimes being effective in rural Fayette County, for example, is me going to bingo night every month and just sitting there and talking with them because that's what they want and that's what their community needs. Whereas in Pittsburgh, that might look very different. That might be a stream of calls pretty regularly on a weekly basis. And so I don't know that I have an answer for that other than hearing feedback from our communities, but also being as effective as we can in the moment. Oh, okay, I can anticipate these needs. I want to make sure that I'm taking information on grants and I want to make sure I'm taking information on additional policies that maybe this community would be able to find useful, or hey, while I'm here, I'm going to meet with some elected officials, things like that. And so I don't know if there's an answer other than trial and error, right? We want to be effective without just checking boxes.
Can I take a crack?
Sure, Jordy.
I mean, we actually we have this advisory board that Emily mentioned, which is people from around the Commonwealth. And because under your question really goes to the heart of a key issue, which is, what do we do like as an office? A lot of what we do that's meant to be a benefit are these enhanced public participation. Well, those are often about projects that people are unhappy with or don't want to have. So if we just did a survey of like, are you happy with DEP? We'd get like really low numbers. So are we being effective or not? So how do you measure the effectiveness of public engagement around things which are controversial or unpopular? Uh, we asked our EJAB to start to put their arms around that and come up with ways that would be meaningful, because I think just kind of a sort of customer service kind of response we know what it would say and it wouldn't really tell us how to do a better job. So that's an example of like, we're kind of, I think, at the bleeding edge as an agency of figuring out what that means. And then the other thing is, yeah, we do measure the quality of relationships, right? So like the things Emily said, like we actually track that, and our supervisors say like, oh, look at all of these meetings that the coordinators are having. So they're taking that as like a positive step, and that was part of making sure they understood, right? Like how many opt-in or how many trigger permits, we don't control how many permits come in, so that's not really a way we would measure our effectiveness, like how many permits are in Emily's area. That's out of her control. So
I know at the top of the call, when you were reporting on numbers from last year, Emily, I think you said there were a total of like, was it 500? Mm, I think it's just measuring the quality there in that aspect, I think is definitely proof that there is impact.
Yeah, and there's a lot of organizations that we try to think out of outside the box too. I know that we have been moving outside of just our normal, oh, where are the environmental advocacy groups, right? That's really important for the work we do, but so are food banks, schools, even all the way down to elementary, right? Rising up the next generation to be aware of these and that they do have a voice starting very, very young, and how to build an effective public comment, or what are regulatory agendas, what is the legislative versus enforcement branch, what are the differences there in state and federal. So I don't know, I just think it goes to all of that, and now that we do have the final EJ policy, we'll be able to kind of think more outside the box and what does effectiveness mean.
I want to do a final scan for our audience today. If there are any additional questions before we close out today's call. I'm going to interpret the silence as there are no additional questions. Uh, so thank you for the attendees for joining us today for this really exciting call for the first time for SINSPA with learning about the updated EJ policy and the updated PennEnviroScreen Mapping Tool. Thank you to Emily and John, the DEP OEJ broadly, for working tirelessly to advance these EJ priorities at the state level. As I said at the top of the call, the session is being recorded, and I will send out an edited version, likely tomorrow, maybe the day after I get it cleaned up a little bit. And then all of the resources shared in the chat will also be available to the attendees as well. So just again, want to say thank you so much. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, John. Thank you, Jordy, as well, for helping provide some additional context. Really appreciate it. And we look forward to continuing the conversation.
Yeah. If I hear PennEnviroScreen, Emily and John will test to this. Anywhere in the state, I like swoop in, because I'm supposed to be.
So glad you did. So glad you did.
Thank you all. Thank you for the invitation, Danny and Andre. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone who joined in today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See ya.